Bill, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Do me a favor and just give us a glimpse as to kind of one, make sure your name is said right, correctly, but two, also what your role is with Servant Solutions and why is it that you want to talk to churches about alternative finances?
Oh, totally. Well, thank you. You did my name justice. My name is Nabil Safi. I was born and raised in Beirut, Lebanon. So that's the if you're curious where this name coming from, and the accent is not Alabama accent. So now you know all the background story of all of that. There's a whole longer story for that, but we can leave it to another day. And my role at Servant Solutions is I'm the VP and COO, Chief Operating Officer, and I have a passion for the church. And I served in a couple of churches in Ohio and Indianapolis, in outreach roles and executive role. God allowed me to have like a business background, like a previous life, and a ministry training as well. So I believe that I'm in the best of two worlds right now. And the reason I want to talk about money because I have a sense that a lot of us are afraid of money or afraid of talking about money, and this is impacting the church, the Big C's church, and in particular our movement, our tribe, because we see more and more people afraid to go into ministry. They either think they have to sign a vow to poverty or to figure out like, oh, I'll do a secular job and I just serve a church. And this is kind of depleting many resources. And my passion is to help church workers and pastors to have, uh, I would say, reasonable and fair compensation and living so that they can survive and thrive in their ministry and that they can invite people with confidence to do that and retire with dignity.
That's asking a lot, it seems like, in today's church world. Survive and thrive and retire with dignity. Those are some big challenges, I think, that many people who are serving in mid-sized to small churches maybe are struggling with. But I recently was having a conversation with a new minister at a very large church who was only getting paid for 10 hours worth of work a week. And so I know it's a reality across the board. As you look at things, Nabil, from your vantage point, working with Servant Solutions, which principally focuses in on helping pastors navigate the financial realities of entering into retirement. So you guys manage retirement funds, et cetera. What is the current financial reality regarding tithes and offerings and ministry expenses that is taking place in local congregations? And why should local congregations explore additional funding options beyond the tithes and offerings?
You mentioned like small churches and large churches, and I've had the opportunity to serve at large churches, but also had the opportunity to engage and work with smaller churches. And the issue or the problem is at every level. Because as we all know, and we read all the reports that say like tithings and contributions is at almost all-time low when it comes to per individual or per capita giving. Like we're still at hovering around the 2% giving instead of the tithe, which is the 10%. And this is kind of the root cause of all what's happening right now. And with the changing demographic and socioeconomic situations and where churches are located, some of them were planted in a really great location, but then life happened and demographic changes happened, so it impacted them. People started commuting to their churches instead of like being a community church. Plus, the generational gap in values when it comes to money, it is changing the whole game. You see, like we have like 6 or 7 generations living right now, and every generation has a different set of values when it comes to supporting a church. And you have like the silent generation, and then the boomers, and all of those, and those older generations, older than Generation X, which I am a Generation X, have the loyalty to just cut a check and give it to the church. But those are either dying off or retiring and having less and less resources. And there is transfer in wealth between those generations, or among those generations, from 1 to 2 or 2, 3 generations. And we don't know if those generations that are receiving have the same values. And again, from research, we know that, especially millennials, at least there has been a lot of research about that they want to participate in giving when they know where the money is going and what's the difference. And so maybe they want to be generous, but they are not generous just to your local church. And this is creating a gap in affordability.
So we've got a lot of dynamics at play. We have dynamics of how much money is available in somebody's pocketbook or bank account. We have values issues. We have, that there are a lot of different ways to give, and we have a more informed giver today than maybe what historically was true, and that people can check to see if this such and such nonprofit really has this high overhead, or if they're giving away their money. It sounds like there's a lot to consider in the wrestling out those tithes and offerings, and based on the research saying that people are only giving 2% of their income, we can't really legitimately say people are tithing. They are giving an offering, but they're not tithing. So,
and you have less and less number of units giving. So those who give are giving more to sustain the congregation, and like new giving units or young giving units is like a rare commodity these days.
So with that in mind, when we talk about the idea that congregations, could explore or should explore alternative funding or additional funding options, what are some ideas that initially rise up that are things that maybe churches should consider, and we'll talk about what assets they might have to be able to leverage later, but what are some ideas of additional funding that a church might just initially consider using?
Well, this is something that you cannot force on a congregation or a church. It has to come like from within, because money is a heart issue. And the way the congregation and the dynamics in that particular congregation, they understand and study money and stewardship, then they have a variety of ways to look at that. Because some congregations probably might lean way on the conservative side and traditional side of things. And you might start talking about like, what's your assets in terms of building and campus and resources. And others, you can go way creative into how you can start new for-profit entities that can help you with that. And each one has its own entity, its own challenges, if you will. And pros and cons. But if you do your math, if you do your feasibility study, and if you do all the things that needs to be done, but then before that, you might do some education on the understanding of money from a theological standpoint, so that everybody is on the same page in a congregation.
So before we jump into the asset conversation, or even should we consider additional funding, there's a heart check that needs to be in place.
100%.
How it is that we think about money. And I know from some research that a friend of mine did that there's, a spectrum of how we think about money, from kind of a conservative, hold on to everything, to complete laissez-faire, just spend whatever you've got, and there's some spaces in between that maybe describe that out. But let's assume that a congregation's heart is thinking right about money, and that money is not something to necessarily acquire and hold on to just for the sake of money, but it is a tool to be used for kingdom advancement. And there are opportunities to explore for investment, or opportunities to say, hey, we're going to hold for a rainy day, and they've kind of balanced those out. What assets might a congregation have that it can utilize in different ways to produce some alternative funding?
Well, a lot of churches, or most churches, have their own buildings, whether they own it outright or not. And even I know some of the churches that they rent their buildings, they have some arrangements for subletting or subcontracting some of that, if they want to use the physical asset of a building as a source of revenue, whether to use it for activities and events, or to use it for other tenants to come and utilize like-minded tenants, or at least aligned tenants that do not conflict with the mission of the church. So that's on one side. On the other side, you could use some of your resources in terms of human resources, because some churches have some who are gifted, for example, in video productions. And so they can capitalize on that, and they can use those folks to do some productions for other entities, like other nonprofits or other small businesses or other churches who do not have that, and they can monetize that. Or if they have some people gifted in the business side of things, specifically accounting. A lot of churches struggle in finding good bookkeepers and accountants, but if they can multiply that and scale that, they can help other churches do that and other nonprofits and monetize that so that it supports their operating fund, if you will. These are some examples.
Let's talk a little bit about the idea of using the facility and leasing it out, and some of the dynamics there. What are maybe some cost barriers via code or other considerations that maybe a congregation should think about prior to deciding or jumping into renting its facility or out to other groups to be able to use for designated purposes?
I've gone through that personally in our congregation, and well, the first thing, we had to go back to our bylaws to make sure that our bylaws protects us, that we can serve the entities and the individuals who are aligned with our mission and vision for the church, so that we do not get in trouble. And that once you open the building to the community, you want to make sure that you have the guardrails and ability to manage that. And another thing is, after you do that, you want to take a look at your building. Is it safe? Like sometimes, let's start this small example. There was, for example, like a room that had the carpet like crumbled in one place. When you use it for a church setting, and this is a trip hazard, sometimes folks in the church like overlook those situations. Well, when it's used for the public, and you have a group of elderly people coming and use it, and they fall, and there's a chance that they will sue you, then that's something you want to take a look at. So the deferred maintenance, the codes, the things that the how much is the fire marshal allowing you to use, the capacity wise, you want to understand all these things, and make sure that you have the resources to be able to cover that. And of course, it's more complicated than that. So I'm not an expert on that, but I'm just giving you some examples of.
So if we're gonna jump into an idea of pursuing alternative funding, there's an aspect in which business management and management skills and facility and those sort of things are considerations if we're going to lease out the building for others to use.
Yes, indeed.
So help me on this one. How might alternative funding, impact a congregation's nonprofit status? Because doesn't nonprofit mean we're not allowed to make a profit?
Yes. The goal is, or the understanding of not making profits is like, if there is a surplus, that the elders or whatever is the structure in that congregations are not divvying up the surplus and taking it home. This is the nonprofit. So it goes back into a fund, and like in accounting, you can create, like, because a lot of churches sometimes they're blessed with a surplus, whether it's through their budget or through a gift from somebody who passed away or some other sort of, and sometimes that's above the budget. So it doesn't mean that they made a profit and somebody is taking earnings out of that. You put it in a set aside fund, and this way you can book it and account for it in a nonprofit way. So that's on the accounting side. On the legal side, there's something that allows the church to do like other related business that is not necessarily donations, and you are allowed as a church to get contributions, or you can sell services and products to do that to a certain percentage.
When we think about this idea of the nonprofit versus profit side of things, there's a lot of confusion in most churches, I think, with regards to that. And I think that even leads to the sentiment of well, we can't pay the pastor because we don't want the pastor to profit from their work. And so if I heard you right, what you were saying is that in a given accounting period, which for many places is a calendar year, but for other places it could be a fiscal year. But in an accounting period, if there is more income than there is expenses, this does not violate the nonprofit status, but rather if we took that excessive income and just gave it away to those who were the owners or the board of directors, and they personally profited from it, that would be problematic. So if we had $10,000 left over at the end of the year, we had 5 on the leadership team, and we said, okay, well, we got $10,000 left over. We got 5. So everybody gets an additional $2,000 at the end of the day. That would be problematic and possibly affecting our nonprofit status, correct?
100%. Yes. 100%. Yes.
And that's vastly different than saying we had $10,000 left over or in surplus, and so now we're going to roll it into a project for next year.
Yes, and this is why you create funds that are outside your budget, and this is how we account for them in like an acceptable way in the US and by the IRS and all that, and you can get audited by that. And in fact, a healthy church with a healthy budget, it should have 3 to 6 months worth of operating budget in a fund. This is where you feel like you don't, like at home, like you want to do your savings, like emergency fund. This is an emergency fund that where you want to create that so that you don't have to go to a bank and live week to week or month to month to pay your bills and keep the lights on. This way you have some cushion to do that.
So I want to talk a little bit about this idea of related services that that you mentioned just briefly. Obviously, a church could use alternative funding in that it could lease out its space, but you also offered the idea of a video studio as an idea, or an accountant who can work for multiple organizations, nonprofits, and those sort of things. What types of services or seminars could a congregation host that could result in alternative income?
Well, I mean, whether it matters what is going to be the subject matter that's going to be discussed, and are people willing to come and pay for that? Like, is there a personality that's going to come? Usually, a lot of churches, some churches, I would say, they would bring in like a subject matter expert, and they would promote that in the community, negotiate the price on all of that, and then make a little bit of overhead cost. Doesn't have to be profit. We use the word profit very loosely here because it's a matter of like, what is the true cost? You have to ask a question as a church. What is the true cost of hosting this service or this ministry? The true cost includes the actual things that you buy and all that, but at the same time, you have overhead, you have lights, you have heating and all that, and you have to make sure that these are covered by that. Sunday morning cannot carry out all these activities throughout the week and throughout the year just by itself. And I'm using Sunday morning as kind of the worship hour, whether you worship on Sunday morning, Sunday evening, or Saturday or Thursday, it doesn't matter the day.
So as we think about, arrangements with like a local daycare, or maybe even a coffee shop or something of that nature that is using the facility, there has to be a lease arrangement that covers the overhead expense, but could also involve, a little bit of surplus gain for the purpose of repaving the parking lot, or for, replacing an air conditioning unit, because businesses have expenses that are associated with it, and you've got to think through maintenance and care of the facility in a variety of different ways. So when you think about kind of what are good, like, typical relationships between a congregation and somebody who could use their building more frequently than, say, a congregation does. I mean, if we're honest, we have 168 hours in a week, and a church might use its property for, I don't know, maybe, I'm going to be generous here, 8 hours a week, 8 to 10 hours a week. What are some good organizations or ideas that you've seen, not necessarily that you're endorsing for everybody, that you've seen that could be compatible for churches to consider being able to use the facility for the 5 to 6 days a week that they're not using the facility?
Yeah, well, you mentioned a couple of those that are really, really good, whether it's a coffee shop or a childcare. And childcare historically has been like I would say, uh, a major ministry and business of a lot of churches across. But more and more, I'm seeing that those childcares, if are not managed well, they become like a burden rather than a source of income to the church. So it's either you want to rent it out to somebody who runs it as a business, or the church might want to invest and intentionally run it as a business. Yes, it is always going to be an opportunity to do ministry through it, because when you're investing in kids, then you have a relationship with their parents, and there's a potential that they would eventually end up in your congregation or visiting one of your services. And if your location is not a prime location, or if it's not super visible, then a childcare opportunity might be better than a coffee shop, because coffee shop is a destination and people want ease of access to that. And if you don't have a huge crowd of people coming in, the profit margin is not worth investing in that. You might just want to be able to look at it as serving our people or coffee, but it's not going to be sustainable long term. But also, I've seen churches also work with before, not just before, after class camps or after class ministries, that they would come and use your platforms and use your churches as after school programs, and these will generate money because the parents would pay money for that, and they need that. And then because if your church has Sunday school classes for kids, I mean, these are used like once a week, and what's the rest of the week if you don't have a daycare? Then you can come and create a partnership with them, and then they will bring you some money, and it's not change. It's like thousands and thousands of dollars. And during the summer, they would do like summer camps for you. And that's been like a very successful operation as well.
So this next question here is related to the structure of it. That you mentioned early on about the idea of check your bylaws and make sure that this is compatible for you. There's also the dynamic of looking at the legal 501c3 arrangements. When might a church consider forming an additional 501c3 for the purpose of like a community development corporation, or what's it, Christian Community Development Association, or something of that nature? When might that be something that a church would consider creating that could support or help in this idea of alternative funding?
Well, honestly, a church can do that at any time, as long as the church leadership had the conversation about what's driving the mission, because usually nonprofits have the affinity and the ability to grow and eventually drive the church if they are successful, because they have accessibility to more people beyond the church itself or the congregation itself. And that's why you want to create that, because you will be able to request grants from organizations that otherwise are not available for churches, because a lot of foundations, they have grants available for nonprofits, but they're not available for a congregation. And as long as the conversation about where's the horse and where's the carriage, and who's driving that and who's driving that, as long as the church has control over, can have ability to have the control over that nonprofit, you can do it anytime. And you have like healthy board members and healthy leadership, because pastors are not necessarily equipped to run those organizations and not equipped to deal with all the money complications. And they want to be able to create this mutual trust opportunity for the congregation to thrive.
So to recap, a church could start a separate 501c3 when it felt it led to. It's just got to be willing to pay the fees. But it opens up some opportunities as you think about the funding sources available to a typical nonprofit as opposed to a religious nonprofit organization. Religious being that the church is a proselytizing evangelistic organization, but the other nonprofit may not have that in its mission statement. It may be more for social good. But the key is to navigate that sense of which comes first or which gets priority can be a big challenge. That's good feedback. Real quick, in your estimate, how is it that a separate 501c3 can open up additional leadership opportunities, within the scope of work that don't necessarily require someone to meet the same qualifications that the Bible may lay out for a elder or what a church may lay out for its historic board of trustees?
Well, yes, I believe like when I was pastoring, my job is to communicate to every week to people who are coming from every walk of life and they are gathering in one place. And by what I mean by communicate is equip and mobilize. And the mobilizing part, and this is where it gets tricky, because some people can be deacons or trustees or board of elders and all that. Some people can teach Sunday school, and some people can go work on a mission trip with a hammer and a nail. But others, they have like extremely good skills from their professions, whether they are in education or business and all that, but they cannot utilize that in a traditional church setting. But when you open that opportunity in a nonprofit board, then if they are in sales, these are great people for networking. They can bring new donors for that organizations. If they are in marketing, the same thing. If they are in accounting or any background that could bring them an education, they can bring a lot of structure for the organization, ability to grow beyond the traditional form of the church.
So we open up the door for people to be able to serve from a variety of different backgrounds, and the opportunity to expand the giving base or the donor base or the income base in general increases, because some people are more likely to support the cause of feeding the homeless than they are the cause of the church. So what disadvantage is there in your mind to a church forming a 501c3 that is for the purpose of the community development corporation that works alongside of its religious ministry purpose? What disadvantages can you foresee? Because I've only heard a lot of advantages, and so I'm just curious, where might be some disadvantages?
I mean, some of potential disadvantages could be that since you might offer that opportunity for people within and without the church to contribute, whether time, energy, and money and resources to that, there could be a chance that some of that money and commitment move from the actual church to the nonprofit. Because again, money and passion and ministry is a hard issue. And when you touch the heart, and I don't see it as much as a disadvantage, I see it as an aha moment. Apparently, I was doing something wrong on the other side that I didn't get that person fully engaged. But instead of going somewhere else, because every person in our congregation gets hit by many touch points when it comes to giving and serving and all that. So if I give like a bigger menu and opportunities, then I have more people engaged. It is a disadvantage, but at the same time, I want to look at it as an opportunity.
So Nabil, help me out here. As you kind of think about the mindset of the average congregation as it relates to income and the income sources, why is it difficult to change that mindset to broaden the horizon beyond an offering plate?
Well, I think we've been conditioned for decades that sometimes to an extreme that money is evil and profit is a bad word, and anything that is not through the traditional tithes and offerings is considered that you are walking out of faith because we walk by faith and God will provide. And I 100% support that. If if that was working, then everybody would should have been giving 10% because we have the freedom in Christ to, and in my opinion, to start from the 10%, but we cannot enforce a policy. And so we want to inspire people to be good stewards. And I personally, I try to differentiate between um, generosity and stewardship. Generosity is giving more. Stewardship is more like God owns it all, and I'm just a manager on all these resources that God and this way everybody has the ability to participate at different kind of pain points, if you will, because it's not equal amounts, but equal sacrifice. And theologically, over time, some people get conditioned that anything that we bring to the church in terms of a business activity, uh, there's an image of Jesus being in a temple and turning the tables off. And there's a lot. I mean, we can talk 2 hours about those kind of things. And because in other terms, you would ask the question like, why would there be like over almost 2,000 verses about money and possessions in the Bible? Is there a purpose behind that? Did Jesus say those like just by happenstance, or was that intentional? Does he know our heart, or he just wanted to give like cool ideas? And so there's a lot of education and prayerful heart opportunities to understand what is the heart of stewardship, especially when it comes from God's heart towards us. Does
So
that make sense?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think you nailed it. That there's a sense in which we think that if we are relying on something other than tithes and offerings, that we are not walking in faith. And then the image of Jesus at the temple casting out the money changers, and that is a strong image. And so those two principles can often make it difficult for us to consider how a congregation, a a facility that is, in many of my people's minds, a temple, can serve the community in ways beyond just being a house of prayer and worship and a place of teaching. So I think that those are some major mindsets that we have to make sure that we've considered and that we've educated ourselves on. And as we've examined scripture and we've prayerfully sought the Lord and listened to the Holy Spirit, I think those are big factors into it. I'm just curious what other resources you might recommend for a team that was, wanting to pursue alternative funding ideas. What resources might be big? Ooh, these are inspirational, and maybe if you've got even a few that are real hands-on, practical, that could fit into that category.
Yes, I mean, first, there's a book that I got inspired by to do a research on and start doing all these things by Mark Dumays. It's called The Coming Revolution of Church Economics: Why Tithe and Offerings Are No Longer Enough and What You Can Do About It. It's easy read and it makes total sense. And this guy did it himself. Like this is how what was the model that he and his leaders were able to build the church. Another really good book that I found helpful was by Carl Vader's The Grasshopper Myth: Big Churches, Small Hurt Churches, and the Small Thinking That Divides Us. Self-published book, but it talks a little bit about the money concepts as well in that setting as well. I mean, I have other resources, but I mean, I don't want to take a whole lot of time. And if somebody wants to reach out, I'll be happy to uh, kind of spend some time with them over the phone or over a Zoom call, I'd be happy to share my thoughts about it.
Yeah, that's really kind of the last question that I have for you there is, how could Servant Solutions be a guide in the process of understanding if a congregation should explore alternative income streams?
Yeah, well, to be honest, Servant Solutions is focusing on retirement, and the reason we want to talk about that, or at least finances in a church and finances of pastors, because we know a lot of pastors are struggling because of the root cause, and the pastor's situation is a symptom. And although we're not experts on alternative funding, but we'd be happy to talk to you. We have a couple of people who've been in those situations, including myself, that we'd be happy to share our at least experiences, but we do not have like a formula just to make sure that set expectations right. We'll be happy to share and explore situations with your congregations, and because we want to make sure at the end of the day that there's a healthy compensation opportunity for the pastors. And something that I didn't share earlier is when you start using those opportunities, you find that you find monies to be able to hire quality people and retain them through those alternative income, and they can serve the church in. So it's like a reciprocal situation, and this way you have your youth pastor, you have your media person, you have your, but you don't have to pay for it just from your tithes. So we'd be happy to talk with you about that.
Nabil, thank you so much. There's been a lot of ground that we've covered here, and there's a lot more that could be covered. As you said, some of these conversations can go on for hours. But I think it's the opening of the door to recognize that if we're going to be effective in ministry, we have to have money conversations. And those money conversations have to be, honest about where the status of tithes and offerings are, but also has to be open to alternative funding methods that are available beyond the offering plate. The offering plate, or as we call it in my church, the joy box, and that's where everybody says, woo! Right, is historically how we've thought of funding our congregational ministries, but it is not the only way that it can happen. It is a principled way that it has happened and will continue to happen, but it is not the only way. So
yeah, and you summed it up real well, because what you just said is like you're helping people feeling like I get to support the church, and that it's not like I have to, and you're offering them multiple ways. One of like the who in your church is like it's giving them an opportunity to celebrate that, and this is where we want everybody to get to that point.
Well, Nabil, thanks so much. Appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us and help us think about this. And who knows, maybe some people will give you a call, give you a shout at Servant Solutions, so that way they can get a little bit more insight for their context, because that's what's hard, I think, is trying to talk about this generally when each context has its own dynamics, whether the church is ready, whether it has the proper facility, whether it has the right venue as far as traffic flow, all does it have connections with the people? There's so many things to consider into it. But if we don't start the conversation, we'll never be able to diagnose if it's right for us.
Thank you for the opportunity. We love our church, and we love your churches and congregations, and that's one thing we want to keep emphasizing. That's out of the love of Jesus we're doing all this.
Thanks so much.
I can't love like that. Can't love like that.